difference between the old deal and the new deal?
Ah, that's a great question.
Is there a middle deal?
In fact, I'm going to ask you guys this. What does a New Deal refer to?
The newest of deals.
This is a new deal on your car.
I heard they threw an extra 5% onto this one.
A new deal. What's it mean? You guys aren't poker players. What does it mean in poker?
Deal you in hand.
That's what he's talking about. A new deal. It's a new deal. You had a bad hand, bad start, bad script. Good to do a new deal. Totally a new deal. That's exactly what he's talking about. That's his argument. That's his slogan. This is a new deal. It's not like a new deal like I can make you a deal in your car. He's not selling us anything. No, he is. It's a new deal like you get an opportunity to start from scratch. This was a really big thing for Roosevelt. And you guys actually know this already, but I'm going to articulate it. Last class, we brought us right up to 1932, but we didn't get into 1932. Just right up to 1932. Today, we're going to go into 1932, and without giving away the daily quiz, it's really important. I don't know if I should say anything. I won't. I won't say anything. But it's kind of important to understand, first, the transition from Hoover into Roosevelt, and then to understand Roosevelt. And I'm being really cryptic because I don't want to give away the daily quiz. We'll do the daily quiz, and then I'll be much less cryptic. Let's do that first. Let's pop this open. Harding was elected in 1920 after Wilson. And then Harding did something that most presidents don't ever want to do. What is that? He died. One of those things. And then Coolidge comes in. Remember Coolidge? Coolidge is a guy who's very famous in 1923 because he wiped off all the people that were involved with the Teapot Dome scandal, which was really kind of Harding's doing. Now, it wasn't him personally, but it was his administration. Remember, post-World War I versus pre-World War I, what happened to the amount of money that was going through the federal government?
There was a lot more.
A gob more. And that's where the scandal came from. It was the Secretary of Interior, the Teapot Dome scandal, but it wasn't the only scandal. But most of it had to do with lots more money. One of the ways that Coolidge took care of the scandal, well, he's dead, so we don't need to worry about him. See, wrong way. But Coolidge not only fired a bunch of people, but he made his definition of reform to be what?
Restraint.
Restraint. It's your money. It's not my money. It's the public's money. So we do less spending. We don't get involved. We restrain ourselves. This is very important. Coolidge wins the election in 1924. Remember, it's a year and a half later. If he does not handle the Teapot Dome scandal right, he doesn't get reelected. He does. He handles it very well. He gets very well elected. In fact, not only does he get reelected, but during the 20s, he lowered taxes. He didn't believe in no taxes. He said everyone should pay a little bit. I mean, everybody, poor, rich, everybody should pay a little bit, because then you've got some skin in the game, right? If you don't pay anything, then you don't care about what the government is doing. Everyone should pay a little bit, but it should be a little bit, because not only does the federal government not need all this money, but the more that we have, then the more that we get into what you're doing. This became kind of a philosophy, an ideology. Now, the interesting thing is it's not necessarily a new ideology. You guys have heard this, even if we didn't speak about it a lot, although we've referred to this a couple of times in my class. But when you were in junior high, they talked about this a lot with the 1800s, dealing with something called this. How many of you French scholars are out there? What's it be? What's it say? Yeah, it's a vous conjugation of faire, which is to be, and to laissez faire is basically to let it be. And the best way to describe translate in English, to let it be. And what it means in practice is that the federal government only deals with things that matter between states. interstate stuff. For the most part, the states deal with the things that are inside the states. And this isn't news, by the way. This is the whole concept of federalism. But more than that, businesses take care of themselves. For the most part, businesses are left alone. There are some screaming examples that occur with progressivism. What are the screaming examples that are a reaction to industrialization? And we talked about this when we talked about industrialization. Some screaming examples where the federal government got involved. Can you tell me something? That's right. One of the things was, now this wasn't a federal issue as much. Most of the states had secret ballots. Okay, that's to prevent the political machines coming over. What the feds did do is that they had civil service exams. And this makes sure that if you were going to get hired to be in somebody's cabinet, that you have to have passed some test. That's one. There's another one, kind of a really big one. I'll say Rockefeller. I'll say Carnegie, not so much.
Antitrust.
Antitrust. Antitrust is a federal law. Antitrust. You cannot have monopolies. Well, clearly antitrust doesn't say businesses can do whatever they want to. There's a point that if they get too successful and they eliminate competition, then you've undermined that free market. But for the most part, short of dominating the market, the federal government, hands off. Let it be. Hands off. We're just going to let the economy just do by itself. It's kind of the definition of a free market. The thing is that this is also not new. This is the whole concept of federalism. But mostly when we were talking about federalism prior to the 1870s, we didn't worry about business. We had another issue that was really dominant in people's minds. Now, you didn't take History 101, but just take a wild guess. In the 1830s, 1840s, especially in the 1850s, what big issue was really on everybody's minds with regard to federalism? In other words, the federal power to regulate things in the states. What issue was in the back of people's minds? I'll give you a hint. It culminates in a big war from 1861 to 1865.
Slavery.
Slavery. Who decides whether it's legal to enslave another person? Is this a state issue or is this a federal issue? And what was the end result, the answer to this, by the way? We had to have a war to make it really clear. Federal issue. The federal government guarantees a minimum level of rights. A minimum level of rights. We talked about this when we talked about the 14th Amendment and due process. 13th Amendment says no slavery. 14th Amendment says that means that all the states have to respect this too. Because whatever the minimum level of rights that the federal government establishes, the states has to provide at least that much. Now they can give you more rights, but they can't give you less. And then the 15th Amendment says, by the way, anyone who is a citizen, any of the males, regardless of their color, they get to vote. Civil War Amendments, 13, 14, 15. We were debating issues of federalism quite a bit in the early 1800s, but almost always it was being expressed in these questions of slavery. It didn't mean that they didn't come up, but the reason why I mention this is that when the Civil War is over, we just don't really talk about it. And this is kind of ironic, because one of the things that the Civil War does, I'm going to give you another picture here. Here's the Civil War, right? Pre-Civil War, there's a great deal of debate between Federalists' ideology and, you might say, anti-Federalist ideology. This was mostly resolved in the early 1780s when we drafted the Constitution, the Federalist-Anti-Federalist debates. But when you take my History 101 class, I tell you that that debate may have been settled in the sense that we ratified the Constitution, but it wasn't ended. The Constitution of 1789 basically created a constitutional, a federal government. What it replaced was called a Confederate government. I think I mentioned this in this class before. A confederacy is when you have lots of states and they each are independent and sovereign, but they agree to come together in a union. There is a modern confederacy today in the world, very powerful. It's beginning to fall apart for the same reasons, frankly, that most of these confederacies fall apart. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? That's exactly it, the EU, European Union. That is a confederacy. And when the United States first began, 1783, right after the American Revolution, we formed a confederacy. And it was the Articles of Confederation, which was our first government. The Articles of Confederation. And basically it treated each state as if it was its own country. And they all sent representatives to this union government. In the very beginning, it was kind of embarrassing in the early or mid-1780s when they would come to meet, because there was no capital at that time. They would meet, say, in New York City or in Philadelphia. Often the locals would chase them out of town. And it's not that they hated America. They liked America, but they wanted New York to be for New Yorkers, Virginia to be for Virginia, Massachusetts for Massachusetts. They didn't like this centralized power. And you can understand why. Because part of the reason why we had the whole American Revolution was that we didn't like somebody in England telling us what to do. So we were very local. It was our immediate reaction after the American Revolution. We're not going to have other people tell us what to do. So we're not going to have somebody in Washington, D.C. tell us what to do. We're not going to have some union power tell us what to do. Our state tells us what to do. But, as with all confederacies, there's a problem. And the EU, have you been following it? Are you guys in the econ classes? Or poli-sci? Yeah. What's the problem with the EU?
Because, like, the part of it is the economic issue.
Yes.
Some countries are, like, still, like, versus, like, having the euro versus their own, like,
That's
currency.
right.
Like, with, like, the Brexit, like, the pound versus...
Yeah. I don't want to get into modern history too much, but you're on the ball. Is Italy a strong, thriving economy? No, it's a dead weight. And yet they're part of the EU. And so the rest of the EU is doing really well. And then Italy is kind of dragging everything down. And Greece, especially, even worse. So Greece is dragging everybody down. So the people that are really strong players in the European Union don't want to be, because they don't want to have to support the dead weight, right? It's only taken a matter of, I don't know, what's it been, 15 years? I don't remember the EU formed, late 90s, mid 90s. Not been that long. And they had great hopes, and for a while, the goal was that if Europe combines economically, it can be at least a competitor to the United States. I know I don't want to get into modern news and stuff, but I know that you guys hear news all the time about how terrible everything is. But even now, the American economy is about 5 times as strong as the entire EU. It's huge. It's about 15 times as large as China. What they're called the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Combined, the United States economy is really, really huge. So the idea was if you combine, you can be more competitive on that market. But the problem with all these confederacies is that these states all want to put their interests over the other interests. That can be a problem. In the end, in the United States, we got rid of the Articles of Confederation, and instead we created the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, which creates a federal system. But it passed by a hair's breadth. And in order for us to get it to pass, we had to have 10 changes right off the bat. Do you guys remember what those 10 changes were called? Because you guys remember your English. And what does it mean when you change a bill or you change a law? What do we call that change?
Amendment.
An amendment. And so what are those first 10 amendments called? Bill of Rights. You guys are so brilliant, you didn't even have to take the first part of this. And as soon as that passed, then begrudgingly, people started ratifying. The point here is that this debate between the Federalists, the people that wanted to have a federal union, and those that wanted to have an anti-federal, more of a state-based union, this was still a strong debate. Now, here's the question that I mentioned. At the Civil War, up until the Civil War, there is a question. Which one has more authority? The federal union or the state? Which had more authority? And beginning in the 30s and 40s, 1830s and 40s, the southern states were beginning to say the states have more authority. When you hear someone talks about states' rights, that's what they're talking about. The states should be able to determine for themselves. So in the matter of slavery, the states determine whether slavery is illegal, not the federal government. Well, this is a debate, and then we have this big conflagration called the Civil War, and we end the debate. And we end it with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Again, these are new changes to the Constitution. And these changes make it really clear that on the matter of rights, who is superior? The federal government. And then here's an irony of all irony. The Civil War kind of answers the question. But you guys are smart. Just because the North won, does that mean that all the Southerners or the ideas that the Southerners held disappeared? No, of course not. Okay, just think of this for a second. You got two people, they're on the playground, they're fighting with each other, and one of them starts beating up on another guy over some issue. I don't know, a girl or a car, it doesn't matter, sneakers. So one guy wins. It's a close fight though, and one guy wins. And then they shake hands and they're friends. What don't they talk about for the next, I don't know, week or two?
They disagree on?
Whatever they disagree on. That's just not what they're talking about. So we're not actually surprised by this. So with the 13th, 14th Amendment, we make it really clear that the federal government is the last word on matters of rights. That's what the 14th Amendment says. It's a really big amendment. We don't talk about it. We don't really exercise it. And so, in matters of business and other things, as best as we can, we do laissez faire. And this isn't new. It's kind of the whole concept of freedom. And oddly enough, of course, the Southerners and Anti-Federalists love laissez faire, because then the federal government just doesn't get involved. What about the Northerners? Do they like laissez faire? Well, think about it. What does laissez faire mean? Let it be. Hands off. Hands off. Let it be. Let it be. So, North is dominated by industry. Do they want to have a lot of federal rules and regulations to tell them what they can and they can't do? No. Now, in matters of slavery, this was a moral issue. That was important. But in matters of business, it's okay. So here's a situation where the Anti-Federalists are really happy for the laissez-faire. Do you know who else is? So too are the Northerners. And so for the last 30, 40 years, that's kind of the way things were. But then there's another change. Right here I have the Civil War as this big change in the 1900s. Let me put up another picture, not have Civil War. Let's have